بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وفقهنا إذا جهلنا وزدنا علما نافعا وعملا متقبلا يا كريم اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وفهمنا معاني التنزيل وبعد اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما صلاة تفتح لنا بها أبواب الرضا والتيسير وتغلق بها أبواب الشر والتعسير أنت مولانا فنعم المولى ونعم النصير اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما صلاة تفتح لنا بها أبواب الرضا والتيسير وتغلق بها أبواب الشر والتعسير أنت مولانا فنعم المولى ونعم النصير اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما صلاة تفتح لنا بها أبواب الرضا والتيسير وتغلق بها أبواب الشر والتعسير أنت مولانا فنعم المولى ونعم النصير وبعد. As of yesterday, we came on to ayah number 33 in Surah Yasin, and what we mentioned and what we've seen from the beginning is that Surah Yasin is Surah of Iman, Surah of faith, which deals with the three core elements of faith, التوحيد والنبوة والسمعية, which is about belief in Allah, belief in prophets, and belief in the Day of Judgment. We came on to ayah number 33. However, what we notice is that even though the normal tartib, the normal sequence would be that you start with belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Surah Yasin was revealed in response to the kuffar, the unbelievers saying to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you are not a messenger, you are not sent by your Lord, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala began with a nubuwwah. And we went through the whole of Ashab al-Qarya, the people of Antioch, and Habib al-Najjar, all of that discussion, and then the destruction of the people of Antioch as a warning to the people of Mecca that they could be dealt with in the same manner. So Allah started with nubuwwah, started with the discussion on prophecy. But now He returns to the key. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to the central theme of Aqeedah, the primary theme of Aqeedah. And so the middle segment of Surah Yasin, from وَآيَةٌ لَهُمُ الْأَرْضِ up to the ayah before وَيَقُولُونَ مَتَى هَذَا وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنْفِقُوا up to verse 47 is dealing with issues of tawheed, is dealing with issues of faith. And then from verse 48 to the end of the surah, it's all about Yawm al-Qiyam, it's all about the Day of Judgment. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts to bring signs, ayatun azima, great signs about wujudullah ta'ala, about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here the ayah, he begins by saying وَآيَةٌ لَهُمُ الْأَرْضُ الْمَيْتَةِ, and the sign for them, الْأَرْضُ الْمَيْتَةِ. Now just a small bit of grammar here. Normally in Arabic, you begin with what's termed as the mubtada and you delay the khabar. Normally, the mubtada, the subject, is the beginning point of the sentence. Then you delay, you delay the khabar which informs about it. But here Allah subhanahu reverses it. He starts with the ayah, which is the khabar. وَآيَةٌ عَظِيمَةٌ لَهُمْ الْأَرْضُ الْمَيْتَةِ. So here Allah subhanahu begins with the khabar. So the actual original way would be وَالْأَرْضُ الْمَيْتَةُ آيَةٌ لَهُمْ. The dead earth is a sign for them. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins with the sign, the khabar, because the sign here is the important thing. But taqdeem lil-ihtimam bihi. Allah subhanahu begins with the khabar because of the importance of the khabar. It's the important, the dead earth is not the important thing. It's the sign of the existence of Allah subhanahu. That's the important part. وَآيَةٌ. And again, as we've come across, I think there's been a couple of examples before. تنزيل العزيز إنك على صراط مستقيم. He said the nakira is للتفخيم. Sheikh Ali Sabuni said the nakira is للتفخيم. The indefinite here is to give the meaning of something great. And there's something similar here. وَآيَةٌ وَآيَةٌ عَظِيمَةٌ لَهُ. وَآيَةٌ, the nakira, indicates something great. And a sign, a great sign, a truly great sign to them is the dead earth. Before looking at the sign itself that Allah subhanahu speaks about, everything within a creation is a sign of His existence. Everything in creation is a sign of His existence. And the word in Arabic, which Allah begins revelation with, is رب العالمين. العالم من العلامة وهي علامة على وجود الصانع. The world of existence is a sign. What's a sign posting towards? The existence of the Creator. The word for world of existence. والعالم هو كل ما سوى الله. And the world of existence is everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in that it's the created world of existence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, but He's not part of His creation. It's a sign. It's a sign. And so everything in existence is a sign of the existence of the Creator subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a sign to them of His existence. And whenever you read Surah Yasin, وَآيَةٌ لَهُمُ الْأَرْضِ وَآيَةٌ وآية لهم الليل وآية لهم أنا حملنا. آية على ماذا? What's it a sign of? That He subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. That's a sign, as you read it, a sign pointing to the Creator subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the power of the Creator is the dead earth. Al-Ardul Mayta, the first sign to look at, the dead earth. أحييناها, we gave life to it. وأخرجنا منها حبا, and we brought forth from a grain. فمنه يأكلون. And from it they eat. Just also to point out, and something that we mentioned before, that here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses noon al-azama. He uses a we. And we said before that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is sunnatullah fil Quran, fil tanzeel, without any exception, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only uses a we in relation to Himself when He speaks about His af'al, never about His that. Never does He say that we are Allah. He never says that. Plurality in that case is out of place because of the potential shirk. Whereas the greatness of the acts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces the we. We gave life to it. And from the greatness of our acts is ihya al-ard al-mayta, is bringing life back to the dead earth. And we brought forth from the dead earth itself grain, and then from it they eat. The Sheikh Ali Sabuni rahimahullah ta'ala in his Tafsir says the meaning of this ayah from min al-ayat al-bahira, from the magnificent signs, wal alamat al-zahira, and clear indicators. When you read the words that he uses, as we just mentioned, magnificent and clear signs, where's all that coming from? And it's the brilliance, the balagha of the Quran, that Allah subhanahu conveys meanings within harakat. It's not even within words and letters. As we just said, it's the tanween that gives it magnificent clear. So even within harakat, even within vowels, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conveys great meanings. So from amongst the magnificent signs and clear indicators that show kamari qudratillahi wa wahdaniyati, the perfect power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His divine singularity. When you study Aqeedah, this point is raised, that creation not only proves the Creator, His existence, but it also proves that He's one. And it also proves that He has power, and He has knowledge, and that He is alive, and so on. All of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are proven by creation, by the Creator creating creation. So it's not just that He exists, but His tawheed is wahdaniyah, the fact that He's one. What proves that is creation. What proves that he's all-powerful is creation. And here in this context is this mighty sign, al-ayat al-azima. And what's the sign? The dry, lifeless earth, having no growth, no crops within it, which we, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, revive with the rain. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here tells us, we've come out of winter, the dead earth, and now we're moving into spring, the Rabi', and then we go into the summer. Every single year, the cycle of the earth, although as human beings are beginning to destroy the earth, that cycle is now changing. But that's because of the destruction of human beings. That's ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر. That's the destruction and corruption of humanity within the cycles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. But the cycle that starts with the winter when it's dead, then moves into spring when life starts to, and then you go into the summer, the peak, and then the autumn as you go into the old age, and then you go back into death. That cycle, that constant cycle, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us that He is the Khaliq. ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْحَقِّ. That is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the real. Although that's not the point of this, but elsewhere in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at the beginning of Surah Al-Hajj, for example, in other places, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points out that the dead earth that comes back to life is just a reflection, it's a mirror of the nature of the human being himself. What a human being goes through throughout the whole of his life, he was dead, he was nothing. Kuntum amwatin fa'ahyakum. You were dead, you were nothing, and then He gave you life. That was the winter. The human being when he was nothing was the winter. Then you move into the spring which is your childhood. Then you move into the summer, which is your adult life, and then you move into the autumn, which is your old age, and then you move into winter, which is death. That's a cycle of life that is reflected in the very earth that we created from. Minha khalaqnakum. We created you from it, and we created you to reflect the nature of the earth that you came out of. So the dry, lifeless earth, which Allah then brings to life, is not just a reflection of His power within the earth, it also mirrors our own existence because we came out of that very earth. So the dry, lifeless earth having no growth, no crops within it, which we, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, revive with the rain. Shaykh Ali Sabuni rahimahullah ta'ala, he then comments further saying that the commentators, the Mufassirun state, Al-Ard al-Mayta, the death of the earth is its drought and its revival is by rain. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends rain down to it, it quakes, it pushes up. And the language they're quaking, اهتزت وربت وأنبتت من كل زوج بهيج. That's the language of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He used at the beginning of Surah Al-Hajj, that the earth is dead, rain comes down, and then suddenly you start seeing the first shoots that start growing, pushing up. And then suddenly in no time, a barren desert, just a small amount of rain comes down, and suddenly life appears in no time whatsoever. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says afterwards, وَأَخْرَجْنَا مِنْهَا حَبًّا فَمِنْهُ يَأْكُلُونَ. And we brought forth from it, from the dead earth, grain, and then from it they eat. This means we brought forth with this rain, all types of grain, that you may be nourished. Al-Sabuni then further adds, from Tafsir al-Qurtubi, Al-Imam al-Qurtubi in his Tafsir, he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by this has pointed out to them the revival of the dead. Ihya al-Mawta, dead earth being brought back to life, is a sign of the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He can bring the earth which is dead back to life, and then food out of that very same earth for you. That's one sign. But then there's another sign within the sign. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing to the fact that in the same way that the earth is dead and He brings it back to life, He will cause you to die and He'll bring you back to life as well. Al-Ard al-Mayta reflects you and I. Al-Ard al-Mayta reflects you and I. Whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to create us out of the clay of the earth, out of the soil of the earth, And our nature is very much tied into the earth itself. The food that we eat comes out of the earth. Our life cycles reflect the earth. So just as he brings back to life the dead earth, he'll bring back to life the dead human being that came out of that earth. So he pointed out to them the revival of the dead and reminded them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminded them of his tawheed, that he alone has the ability to do that. That's his single nature and his complete power over that dead earth, which he revived the growth, and from which he brought out grain. They eat and are nourished by the grain. That's Al-Imam Al-Sabuni. Just switching over to Al-Bahr Al-Madid, Ibn Ajib in his Tafsir. He highlights that as a beginning point when he does the Al-Munasabah, when he connects. And so why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking now about وَآيَةٌ لَهُمُ الْأَرْضِ, the sign, after speaking about destruction of the people of Antioch. If you remember, the last verse that we saw about the people of Antioch, وَإِن كُلٌّ لَمَّا جَمِيعٌ لَدَيْنَا مُحْضَرُونَ, every single one of them will be gathered in front of us. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ended the discussion about prophets with a reminder of the Day of Judgment. And so here, Ibn Ajib, although first and foremost this is signs of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned through it proofs for the resurrection, al-ba'th wal-ihdar. And why he's mentioned that is the munasabah. It's the direct connection to the verse before. The direct connection to the verse before, resurrection, the gathering, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about resurrection through the dead earth, that he brings life back to. So, Al-Haq, Jalla Jalal, the real, subhanahu wa ta'ala, then says, and a sign to them, وَآيَةٌ لَهُمُ الْأَرْضُ الْمَيْتَةِ, and a sign to them is the dead earth, أَحْيَيْنَاهَا, we gave life to it. A sign for them that indicates that Allah will resurrect the dead and gather them for the questioning is a rebirth of the dry earth with rain, which then stirs and produces crops. So what's interesting here, Al-Imam Al-Sabuni rahimahullah ta'ala, and generally the Mufassirin are going to see this as a sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his existence, his power, and so on. Well, Imam Al-Sabuni, he goes straight to the point that this is also about resurrection, about proving the Day of Judgment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will resurrect the dead and gather them for the questioning is a rebirth of the dry earth with rain, which then stirs and produces crops. He then says, وَأَخْرَجْنَا مِنْهَا حَبًّا, and we brought forth from it grain, all types of grain, فَمِنْهُ يَأْكُلُونَ, and then from it they eat, they and their livestock they eat. Now a grammatical point. You look at the structure. فَمِنْهُ يَأْكُلُونَ, the ending. Although interesting, Ibn Ajiba, because here what he's touching upon is the reversal of order, taqdeem and ta'khir, switching around the order. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he spoke about they eat from the earth, the grain that comes out of the earth, the food that grows out of the earth, he did not say فَيَأْكُلُونَ مِنْهُ, because that's the normal sequence in language. You start with al-fa'il wal-fa'il wal-maf'ul wal-jar wal-majroor. You'll go in the order of verb, subject, object, and then the genitive construct. That's a normal sequence. Whenever there's a switch, whenever there's a change in that order, there's always a purpose behind it. The most obvious example that all are familiar with, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. نَعْبُدُكَ وَنَسْتَعِينُكَ is a normal sequence. The normal sequence, we worship you and we ask help of you. Well, Allah switches it around. He begins with the maf'ul. He begins with the object. So, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ. And there it serves the purpose of al-hasr, a restriction. So here now he raised the question. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not say فَيَأْكُلُونَ مِنْهُ, that they eat from it, and instead he said فَمِنْهُ يَأْكُلُونَ, and from it they eat. So he mentioned first the dharf, which here is the jar majroor, minhu, to indicate, and it generally either they'll say التقديم يفيد الحصر أو الاهتمام به. They say, bringing forward something that comes after will either be restrictive to indicate that and nothing else, or because of the significance of it. Because of the significance of it. So here he says, a human life essentially, or in terms of food and provision for human beings, that's all it comes from. Minhu, min hadha al-hab. Everything that we eat, even the meat that we eat, is coming from animals that eat from the growth of the earth. The milk that we drink, it's coming from pretty much all that we consume. It's coming from the grain of the earth. So to indicate أن الحب هو الشيء الذي يتعلق به معظم العيش. The vast majority of human life is connected to that simple seed that grows out of the earth. And so Allah began with it. Minhu يأكلون. It's not the akal that's the important, it's the minhu, it's the grain itself that's the important, because most of human life centers around it. When it is scarce, when there's little rain and there's little growth, when drought comes, and when there's none of it, then destruction arrives and misfortune descends. Human beings can't live anymore without that grain. فَمِنْهُ يَأْكُلُونَ. From it. He didn't mention this, but as you reflect over Surah Yasin, you can see the same thing with the word before. أَخْرَجْنَا مِنْهَا حَبًّا. He didn't say أَخْرَجْنَا حَبًّا مِنْهَا. Exact same idea. أخرجنا is the fi'l and the fa'il. We brought forth. Instead of saying grain from it, we brought forth grain. So the earth is significant, then the grain is significant, then your eating is significant. Without the earth, without the grain, there is no human life. So Allah subhanahu لِلْإِهْتِمَامِ بِهِ وَالْحَصْرِ, because the significance and restriction, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions that first. Now Imam al-Qushayri, and here Imam al-Qushayri, mashallah, this is Tafsir Shari. This is spiritual tafsir. However, here, this is Aqidah now. And for anybody familiar with the work, the famous, we even mentioned at the beginning when we did a biography of Imam al-Qushayri, one of his main teachers in Aqidah is Ibn Fawrak. And Ibn Fawrak is one of the main early Imams of Ash'ari Aqidah. That's his direct teacher in Aqidah. And those, inshallah ta'ala, who have not studied and will study in future, Ar-Risala al-Qushayriya, the famous Qushayri epistle on tasawwuf and spirituality, begins with a detailed discussion on Aqidah. There is no tasawwuf without Aqidah. There is no spirituality without Aqidah. And so here, even though this is a discussion about Aqidah, about tasawwuf, spirituality, he brings a key point of Aqidah, and in this an attack against those who reject the importance of theological Aqidah. So first he starts by saying, since the issue of the resurrection, Amrul Ba'ath, was the biggest of all the doubts they had, such that they repeatedly rejected it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats the discussion about resurrection. And that should always be remembered, because we're familiar with the fact that these were Ahl Shirk. The people that the Prophet ﷺ sent with were people of shirk. But within their shirk, they recognize that the Rabb is Allah. They recognize that there was a Lord. The problem with Wahdaniyah, the problem was the multiple gods that they had, but they recognized that there was a God, that there was an overall God. So yes, their Tawheed was a problem, but large numbers of the Arabs in the peninsula, they rejected the resurrection of a day of judgment. وَقَالُوا مَا هِيَ إِلَّا حَيَاتُنَا الدُّنْيَا نَمُوتُ وَنَحْيَا وَمَا يُهْلِكُنَا إِلَّا الدَّهْرُ. They spoke the same language of the atheists of this age. وَقَالُوا مَا هِيَ إِلَّا حَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا. They said there's nothing except for the life of this world. نَمُوتُ وَنَحْيَا. We die, we live. وَمَا يُهْلِكُنَا إِلَّا الدَّهْرُ. And all that destroys us is time. Passage of time is the only thing that destroys us. They spoke, the Arabs in the desert back then, they spoke the language of the atheists of this age. All that destroys us is time, because there was no belief in resurrection. And perhaps the Christians, the Jews, they believed in resurrection. And it's interesting, although it's slightly going off topic, although it is connected to resurrection. The likes of Abu Hayyan al-Andalusi and other Mufassirin said one of the clearest proofs of tampering, that the Jews tampered with the Torah, not just the fact there's no mention of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says the Torah, as we have it now, the Old Testament, there's virtually no mention of the Day of Judgment. And you look at Old Testament now, there's virtually no mention of the Day of Judgment. And even though Jews do have a belief within it, but it's almost like it's a side belief, it's not significant. Whereas every prophet came with belief in Allah, the Messenger, the Day of Judgment. And so Abu Hayyan and Andalusi said that's one of the clearest proofs that they tampered with it, that there's virtually no mention in the Old Testament that they have now of resurrection. But that belief was there. People who received revelation had a belief in the Day of Judgment. The people of the desert, of the peninsula, they had no revelation for 2,000 years. So for them, in the midst of the desert, they got to a point where large numbers, they rejected the Day of Judgment. And that was one of the key themes that Revelation was coming to with them. Inshallah ta'ala, towards the end, when we get there, the famous example, أَوَلَمْ يَرَى الْإِنسَانُ أَنَّا خَلَقْنَاهُ مِنْ نُطْفَةٍ فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. When one of the unbelievers comes to Prophet with an old bone and he crushes in the hand, and as the powder falls away, he says, Muhammad, do you say that Allah's going to bring this back to life? And Prophet in a moment of anger, he says, yes, he'll bring it back to life and you back to life and throw you into hellfire. And then Allah spoke about that. وَضَرَبَ لَنَا مَثْلًا وَنَسِيَ خَلْقًا. And that's the end of Surah Yasin. But that was the belief that they had. Large numbers, large swathes of them, there is no Day of Judgment, just this life and that's it. So because denial of the Day of Judgment was such a key point of the kufr that they had, Allah brings back this discussion, comes back to the discussion and continues this discussion. He mentions the similitude of reviving the earth with plants in many verses. Now here the attack from Imam al-Qushayri. He says, how strange, وَلَعَجَبُ مِمَّنْ يُنْكِرُ عُلُومَ الْأُصُولِ. How strange is the one who rejects the rational principles of faith, claiming that there's no evidence for it in the book. In that time they existed, now you have them, and because it's a public class we shouldn't mention names, but people will say that the way of the Ash'ari and the Maturidiyya, the rational arguments, it's Greek philosophy and has nothing to do with Quran and Sunnah. So why then is Allah saying, وَآيَةٌ لَهُمُ الْأَرْضِ? Why does he prove the prophecy of Muhammad saying, وَالْقُرْآنِ الْحَكِيمِ? Why does he bring evidences for the Day of Judgment? If it's just taqleed fil aqeedah, submit and accept as one God, and there's a Day of Judgment and the message is true, without using any rational thought, why is Allah using rational thoughts? You say divinity, you go through Burhan al-Tamanu or Burhan al-Tawarid, you have all of these rational arguments that are used. And if there's a God A and a God B and God A decides and people are saying, A'udhu billah, why are you saying that? It's because Allah said that. لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. Allah said exactly that. People sat in the Aqiqah saying, Astaghfirullah, what is talking about God A and God B for? Because Allah said that. Because Allah used that argument. Ibrahim used a similar argument. He says, هذا ربي هذا ربي هذا ربي. He points to planet Venus and said, this is my Lord. When it says that it can't be my Lord. Then he points at the moon, this is my Lord. It can't be my Lord. And then you say, how could the Prophet say that? Because Allah said, تِلْكَ حُجَّتُنَا آتَيْنَاهَا إِبْرَاهِيم. This is the proof that we gave to Ibrahim alayhi salam. So now you're saying, no, Aqidah requires taqleed. Submit and accept it without thinking about it. Just accept it and just believe based on pure blind faith without any rational thought. Imam Qushayri says how strange it is that the one who rejects rational principles of faith, claim that there's no evidence for it in the book, in the Quran, how can that be confusing when most of the verses of the Quran encourage and push people to istidlal, the way of deducing, and rational arguments. Tahkim adillat al-uqul. When you study the Quran, that's why in Aqidah, it's always emphasized, it's not enough just to know your belief, but you must also know why you believe it. What's your dalil? What's the evidence for it? So it's weird and it's strange. And those same people who are saying that say we follow the Quran and the Sunnah. So what Quran and Sunnah are you reading then? And what Quran are you reading when Allah throughout the Quran is bringing proofs? The vast majority of the Quran is proofs of His existence. Maybe not in the language that the theologians developed later, but they're just developing the proofs that came out of the Quran and Sunnah. So how can that be confusing when most of the verses of the Quran encourage the way of deduction and the use of rational evidence for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? However, He guides His light to whoever He wills. Those who staunchly reject the way the theologians say that, no, that's Greek philosophy, and that's ilm al-kalam was condemned by the Salaf. And the Salaf, some of them did speak about it in a different context and speak against it. But ultimately, those who delve into a rational understanding based on scripture, without divorcing it from revelation, those who delve into it, it says Allah has guided them towards the light of understanding. But then, Imam al-Qushayri, mashallah, he's going a bit harsh on them now. It says, those people who claim taqleed is the only way in aqeedah, that you submit and accept. If only they were fair with themselves and busied themselves with the most important thing for them. Most important thing for them, and essentially, Al-Qushayri said they shouldn't waste their time. They should not waste their time. Because they're delving in matters that are not primary. The primary thing is known for you, dalil as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. If only they were fair with themselves and busied themselves with the most important thing for them, they would never abandon the rational principles of faith. And in an age of atheism, where atheism is to spread like wildfire, it's interesting spreading amongst Muslims, more so amongst those who said taqleed in aqeedah. Those who understand rational basis for belief in God are less likely to be affected. Those who closed off that door completely and said we're not allowed to speak about that, when the tidal wave of atheism spread across the lands of Islam, they were the ones who fell first. They were the ones who fell first. Atheism spread more in those parts of the Muslim world than other parts of the Muslim world. So they would never have abandoned those rational principles of faith. However, they were content with following others' taqleed whilst claiming the rank of leadership and authority in law. They claim to be people of knowledge. Yet at the same time, and what's the weirdest of all thing about it all, where taqleed is required, they said no taqleed. Where taqleed is required, they said no taqleed. Where it's not required, where everybody's required to make a deduction themselves, they said no taqleed. They've got it completely wrong way around. Taqleed is required in Sharia, in ahkam, because individuals themselves can't reach a conclusion unless you spent a lifetime studying it. So that's now where you need to take the word of another person. That's why now we need Abu Hanifa, Malik, and Shafi'i, and Ahmed. That's where, and then they're telling people no taqleed. But where taqleed is not, where Allah has told us not to do taqleed, when He said, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. You must know, yourself, you must know that there's no God. They said you must do taqleed at that point. In Aqeedah, they switched it around. In Sharia, they switched it around. They got it wrong in both areas. However, they were content with following others' taqleed, whilst claiming the rank of leadership and authority in law. It is said of the likes of these people, يا من تصدر في دست الإمامة في مسائل الفقه إملاء وتدريسا غفلت عن حجج التوحيد تحكمها شيدت فرعا وما مهدت تأسيسا. Oh, you have stepped forward at the forefront of leadership and you claim that you're imams of guidance to guide people in legal matters, dictating and teaching. You're oblivious, you have no knowledge whatsoever of the proofs of faith which you're attempting to perfect. You've strengthened the branches here being ahkam al-sharia, the rules of sharia, but you have not prepared the foundations being aqeedah itself. And then, continuing the ayah, where Allah subhanahu then says, وَجَعَلْنَا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون, and we place therein groves of date palms and grapevines. وَفَجَّرْنَا فِيهَا مِنَ الْعُيُونِ, and caused to burst forth therein springs, لِيَأْكُلُوا مِنْ ثَمَرِهِ, so that they may eat of its fruits, and what their hands have worked. وَمَا عَمِلَتْهُ أَيْدِيهِمْ أَفَلَا يَشْكُرُونَ. Will they not then show thanks? Inshallah ta'ala, we'll look at that tomorrow, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala, continuing verses on Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll continue that tomorrow. And just an announcement about tomorrow, from tomorrow onwards, because many are going into i'tikaf, and the program will be streamed from Mustafa Mount. There will be classes streamed from there, so they have to adjust the times according to the prayer times. So from tomorrow, this class will go slightly later. We'll start at 7:15, and inshallah ta'ala, it's not going to shift now for the last 10 days. Or remain at 7:15 up until before Maghrib, till the end of Ramadan, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, idha ahyana Allah ta'ala. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We have one question online. Rational evidence leads to yaqeen. What is the reason for ayn al-yaqeen and haqq al-yaqeen? Yeah, rational evidence leads to ilm al-yaqeen. It doesn't necessarily, it can lead towards ilm al-yaqeen. So not certainty based on knowing. But ayn al-yaqeen and haqq al-yaqeen are higher degrees of certainty. Because knowing something is different to seeing it, which is different to experiencing it. Knowing something, because even within certainty, you can have degrees of certainty. You know something for definite, and you have absolute conviction in it. But then you see it. Your conviction rises a level. And then you experience it. That's the highest of all. And that's the difference between ilm al-yaqeen, knowing, ayn al-yaqeen, observing, haqq al-yaqeen, experiencing and witnessing. And that's the reason, it is said, that's the reason why, or most of the Mufassirin mention, that's the reason behind the question of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Rabbi arini kayfa tuhyi al-mawta. My Lord, allow me to see how you bring life back to the dead. Awalam tu'min, do you not have belief? I mean, do you not have yaqeen? Because of course he's a prophet. Awalam tu'min, do you not have belief? Do you not have certainty? قال بلى ولكن لتطمئن قلبي. He wants to move from ilm al-yaqeen to ayn al-yaqeen. And then the likes of Sayyidina Uzair alayhi salam and the sleepers of the cave, they had haqq al-yaqeen in terms of ihya ba'd al-mawt. Because Allah then gives them a miracle of the birds, sacrifice the birds and call them, and they come back to life, and they came back to life. So Ibrahim alayhi salam saw dead coming back to life in this world. But Uzair alayhi salam, Allah caused him to die. فَأَمَاتَهُ اللَّهُ مِئَةَ عَامٍ ثُمَّ بَعَثَهُ. Allah caused him to die for 100 years and then brought him back to life. That's haqq al-yaqeen. He experienced death and then he was brought back to life, like the sleepers of the cave. So it's about darajat al-yaqeen. It's about different degrees of certainty. Wallahu a'lam. So yeah, there's no other question. We'll continue tomorrow from 7:15 bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Allahumma arhamna bil Qur'an waj'alhu lana imaman wa nuran wa hudan wa rahmah. Allahumma dhakkirna minhu ma nusina وعلمنا منه ما جهلنا وارزقنا تلاوته آناء الليل وأطراف النهار واجعله لنا حجة يا رب العالمين آمين. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ما هو أهله. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ما هو أهله. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ما هو أهله. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. وإلى حضرة النبي الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن